Okay. I have just a minute after 12 o'clock. We have a lot of stuff to get through, so we'll jump in. I'm sure some people will also jump in as we get through all of the information. So today we're going to talk about leading with confidence in the new year as it relates to AI. And we've narrowed it down to 12 ways that HR can lead confidently with AI in the new year. Before we get started, I want to introduce myself. I know a lot of you. I'm Michelle Strasburger. I'm the CEO at HR Rebooted, and I'm excited to be presenting with a good friend of mine and my partner and CMO, Rachel Weeks. Rachel, if you want to do an intro.
Hi, everybody. It's so nice to meet you and nice to be here. Like Michelle said, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for HR Rebooted. Michelle and I worked together many years ago and have remained close since. I'm a high-tech marketer throughout my whole career, and I've spent over 15 years working in HR tech. So I love working with HR people, and I love the intersection of HR and marketing because I really think that there's a lot of alignment and synergy between those two roles.
Right.
All right, so before we get started, we kind of want to level set and see how everybody's feeling about their AI strategy at the beginning of this year. So if you would get out your phones, I'm sure everybody has their phone close by. I'm going to do the same. Scan the QR code, and that's going to take you to where you can respond to our poll. It's an app called Slido. And when you get to the screen, it says, how confident are you about your AI, your 2026 AI strategy? Not confident, somewhat confident, very confident. What strategy? So would love to see everyone's responses. All right, we can see our responses on the phone, Michelle. I
Oh,
don't think we
great.
knew that when we tested it because we didn't have enough responses when it was just me. Has everyone voted or
Yep.
selected their response? All right. Michelle, you see the responses too, right?
I am working on it. I see 10 votes.
Well, I guess by when we are using our phone. But what also, how can I scan this when I'm using my phone?
Do you see that, Michelle, that 80% of us said we were somewhat confident?
I do. So it's well, just changed. So 73% is somewhat confident
Okay.
about their AI strategy in 2026, and about
Right.
18% are not confident.
Because to see more to left, you'll get got him also.
If
So
everyone
that
could
the
Christiana,
people
mute.
Christiana, could you
drive
please go on mute?
better.
Well, we had one person, I believe by the percentages, select very confident.
Well, that was me. And if
I
I
was going to
wasn't
say, would
very
that person
confident,
like to reveal themselves?
if I wasn't very confident in our AI strategy, I wouldn't be working in an AI company, I think. So, yeah.
All right.
Great. We're going to ask you a similar question at the end, so we'll see uh, how that might change. So every successful AI journey begins with a crystal clear strategy. This means anchoring your initiative in your organization's unique goals, culture, and needs, rather than adopting an out-of-the-box solution. Every AI strategy is going to be very specific to your organization, your culture, your goals. You can't just take an AI out of the box and just say, go and be fruitful. And so you really want to start with securing leadership support and what that looks like for your organization. You really have to have executive leadership support. We talk about that. And Rachel and I were talking about this morning of who is that leadership support, right? Of course, you need your frontline leadership support, but we're talking about that C-level, your CEO support. They have to be behind this. They have to be carrying the torch along with you. We do believe that HR, this is an HR initiative, this is a change management initiative, and HR needs to be able to lead confidently in the new year and help drive this and have help drive the strategy. But they need to be in lockstep with the CEO, and the CEO needs to be in lockstep with this. to build that strategic foundation, everything then needs to align. It needs to align with your strategy. It needs to align with your culture. It needs to align with what's unique about your organization, how we're going to use AI. And so you want to collect all of that and set clear objectives. And you can do that, again, a lot of things with this, with creating your AI strategy is not going to be done with tunnel vision, right? You have to lock arms with other departments. And that's why this is pivotal that HR does this and that HR is in the driver's seat. And so linking arms with other departments, getting them together, bringing them to the table and having these discussions of what do we want to achieve with AI? What are the objectives we're looking to get out of AI? And then mapping use cases. Use cases is how we're going to use AI. Is it to improve productivity? Is it to streamline workflows? Is it to help change roles, right? Is it to help improve somebody's role, or give them some additional tools to help improve efficiencies in their roles? And so mapping those use cases helps identify the different projects and needs throughout the organization and helps build the strategy. And again, you're going to need all of those stakeholders at the table to really understand where those needs are throughout the organization. So you want to think about kind of the who, the what, the why when building this foundation and the alignment. And it's really critical, just like with all change management initiatives that you're taking on, that you're thinking about how does this align with our culture? How does this align with our business objectives? How does this align with our organizational structure and our organizational strategy? Because if it's over here on the side, it's not going to be successful. If some of you saw my blog post a few weeks ago, I wrote a blog post called Don't Boil the Ocean. And it's a bit tongue in cheek, right? But it's so true. It's so easy to get excited about AI. And I tend to be one of those people that I'm more ready, fire, aim. And I have to pull myself back because I want to boil the ocean, right? I want to jump right in and use AI and everything and just go all in. And, but it's not going to work. You're going to get people that say, I don't want to do this, right? With every change management initiative, you have people that are early adopters, you have people that are on the fence, and then you have people that are going to be the naysayers and that don't like change, right? And if you're jumping all in, those naysayers are just waiting for you to fail. And they're going to say, I told you so. And so you want to prioritize and you want to take those use cases that you have in the first step and figure out where's the low-hanging fruit, right? What's going to take the least amount of effort and have the biggest bang for our buck? It might be in areas of HR, right? That you can maybe automating looking at resumes. It might be in areas of the business where you can automate maybe customer support and adding some chatbots. It might be, in areas that it might not create a lot of pain to use AI, but could have a big impact. And so where are those areas in the business where you can start to do that and start to see some ROI and start to prove some of that? And then the second piece is, where can you build some enhancements? That's the word I was looking for on the last slide when I got hung up, is where can you enhance somebody's roles, somebody's opportunity, somebody's job with AI, right? Can you keep their role the same, but then add in AI to create some enhancements for their role and bring some ROI? And then phase 3 is the transformation, right? How do we look at the whole big picture? How do we look at the workforce of the future? How do we look at building out our department at a much more transformational way using AI? That could be chatbots, that could be agents, that could be much more disruptive change. We don't want to come in with a lot of disruptive change. We want to start small and then iterate and build upon that. Do it in small chunks and small wins. And then you can celebrate those wins over time and start to get those people that are on the fence with change going, okay, wow, this is this is interesting. This is cool. I can do this, right? I can take this on. This isn't so scary. And then the people that are against change can start to come over as well, and get excited about it. AI, and Bill can probably talk to this as well, even though we didn't warn him ahead of time he was going to be part of the presentation. But AI is continuously changing. And what we know about AI today, I think it's something that we're just really scratching the surface with, right? We're using it most people are using it as a chatbot. We're going in and we're saying, hey, AI, can you clean this email up for me? Can you update this document? Can you look through this document and tell me what's wrong with it? We're just really scratching the surface with it. What we're going to see in the future is it's going to really change workflows. We're going to be hiring one person to manage AI agents. And we're already seeing that in a lot of organizations. And so we have to really think about what that means internally for building AI literacy. And you can actually use AI to build a learning plan in your organization. And you want to think about building knowledge incrementally, because what you're learning today and what we're teaching today with AI is going to change over time. And so you want to teach the core competencies and start to teach the basic skill sets and then build upon that over time. And so start with the core competencies. What do people need to know? And then personalize that. How does that impact me in HR? How does that impact Rachel in marketing? How does that impact Andrew in sales? How does that impact somebody else in a different department in customer service? How can we personalize that across different departments? And then how do we continuously improve? And learning doesn't have to be, this is sometimes something that can be scary and overwhelming. Oh gosh, I have to continuously change my learning plan and my learning platform and build out a learning and development, and I'm going to have to hire somebody for this, and this is overwhelming. Learning can be something as small as bite-sized micro learning. It can be something like LinkedIn Learning. It can be a podcast. It can be an e-newsletter. It doesn't have to be a big initiative, but it can be something that people look at over time, something you send out, just bite-sized learning that people get excited about. And that is personalized. I like to learn through listening. I'm an auditory learner. Somebody else might be a visual learner and they like to read something. And so meeting them where they're at and building learning plans that help get them excited and draw them in, and doing it over time helps develop them. If you can also embed it into their daily workflows, HR leaders can empower employees to learn as AI evolves. And so Writing IO has just launched a really great feature. I don't know if Kevin's on the call, but they've launched a great feature within their platform. They have a learning tool. So you can go in to learning mode as you're using the LLM and then say, oh gosh, I'm not sure how to do this. And then the learning mode kicks in. So they're learning as they're doing. And so less work for you, the HR person, because you're not creating that learning. You're not having to think about it. It's already happening as they're doing the work.
All right. The next thing you want to do is assess your current state of AI in use in your organization and readiness to, roll out a comprehensive strategy. And, everyone works in different types of organizations with different levels of technical savvy and adoption rates. And, whether it's a small company or a large company, there are always going to be more people who are, on the cutting edge, who are trying to adopt new technologies and are always willing to do new things. And then you have the people on the other end of the spectrum, who may be a little bit more skeptical or concerned. And what you want to do is make sure that you meet people where they are. And so, this assessment could take a number of different steps. First of all, the technical readiness, not only about whether or not, the people in your organization are particularly tech savvy, but how much is technology part of, their day-to-day functions? Because there are certain functions that cannot operate without the continuous use of technology. And so therefore, perhaps the integration of AI into those processes is more simple because it'll be more streamlined. Whereas there are other roles within the organization that don't necessarily rely on technology as part of their day-to-day workflow. And it would be more challenging, to get those people and those functions to adopt. So one way to start off with assessing your technical readiness is to identify a team or identify a department and say, let's do a pilot. We want to meet you where you are as far as your use of technology, your use of AI, so that we can then develop policies and process and all of that. But let's identify who's going to be the most open and, frankly, excited about having those conversations. And you want to probably start there. There's been some interesting data. I mean, there's new data every day. Obviously, we see from so many different sources. But there was a report recently that Michelle and I were looking at where the data said that 70 to 80% of companies say that they've adopted AI. But then another data point in the same survey was that technology organizations had only adopted it at a rate of about 50%. And that doesn't really make sense, right? I mean, for first and foremost, you would think that within a technology organization, you do have those people who are going to be early adopters and a little bit more tech savvy. But if the use is really proliferated across the organization, there really needs to be understanding of how and where and why it's being used. So the next thing you want to do is conduct an organizational readiness assessment and a governance readiness assessment. Once you've identified who do you think we're going to roll this out to, who's the best audience within our organization. Well, HR Rebooted offers 2 free assessments on our website, or you can contact Michelle or I, and we can share them with you. One of them is specifically identifying leadership qualities and characteristics that will set your organization up for success with adopting AI. So it identifies strengths and weaknesses and gaps, and you get a comprehensive report that will help you kind of set the context for, okay, where do we think we are? And then we also have a gap analysis, which is more organizationally focused rather than leadership focused, which, same thing. It'll show you where your strengths are, where you potentially have gaps. What we found really interesting in working with some clients is when you have multiple people in the organization fill out the gap analysis and then you compare the results. And you see how there are many different assessments, there are many different, sort of positions that anyone could be in within their organization, based on their role or just, based on their level of knowledge and understanding about use in the organization. So these are, 3 key components to assessing your readiness that you want to make sure are at the beginning of your strategy.
If I can interrupt, I have a story that goes along with this, not AI related, but I was at an organization and we were using Microsoft tools and IT decided we were going to move over to Google. And so they did not do a technical readiness assessment. They just said, okay, we're moving from Microsoft to Google, ready, set, go. And they put everybody on Google and just assumed because everybody was using email that they would understand Google, email, Gmail. And everybody was lost and nobody wanted to use it and everybody stayed on Outlook. Even the CEO did not move over. He stayed on Outlook. He just downloaded Outlook on his desktop and made everything go from, he had the IT person actually set up a link to go from Google to Outlook so he could still use Outlook. So the adoption really did not happen with only a small group of people were using it and they couldn't figure out why. And so this part is really key to starting small, understanding your technical readiness, starting with a pilot and then kind of growing from there and learning from that so that you don't have that same challenge with adoption.
Mm-hmm. Great. Next, and of course, today's topic is being successful with AI, but I think to Michelle's point about, the migration from, one enterprise platform to another enterprise platform, the foundation is all the same, is you need to develop and iterate and communicate your policies, whether it's policies for how you're going to use Gmail versus Outlook or how you're going to use AI in your organization. It's really important to develop a framework so people understand, what their guardrails are. And there's a great story about this daycare, which had a beautiful piece of land and huge yard outside in the back of the daycare center. And of course, the children would go outside and play periodically throughout the day. But the field was so big and expansive and open, the kids didn't really know what to do with it. And so they stayed very close to the building and probably the climbing structure and all those things. And, the organization was wondering, like, why aren't the kids playing on this beautiful lawn? It's huge. Well, they decided to put up some fences. And so it really specified, like, this is our play area. And when they did that, the kids started playing on the lawn. And so just because it was there, they didn't know that it was available to them. But once the guardrails and the fences were established of this is where you can be, the kids got it. And I think that that's a really apt metaphor for the adoption of AI. Because I know that I've talked to a lot of people who've said, my boss is telling me to use AI, but I don't even really know what to do with it. Or I'm using AI, but I don't know if I'm using it the way they want me to or the proper way. And so that's where the fences metaphor again comes in. Because if you develop a policy framework that defines what governance in your organization means, what are the points in time and steps in process that governance is going to be that there's going to be oversight to this governance. There needs to be conversations about what types of risks there are. When you're using a new technology, and especially when you're using AI, if it's not being used safely and properly, there could be data risks. There could be privacy risks to the organization. And I know that that's what some employees feel like nervous about. Like, what if I put something into AI that I'm not supposed to? Like, am I going to lose my job or tank the company? So those things need to be clear. Communication strategy, I'm going to leapfrog to that one because at the end of the day, communication is not just sending an email one time. And we all know that. It's not just periodically saying, hey, we implemented this new AI technology, everybody can use it now. It includes or it encompasses transparent communication about the what and the how and the why. And that includes, mistakes that may have been made or decisions that may have been made that, what? Maybe we should rethink that decision. Maybe it wasn't actually the right way to go about this. And that's where doing a pilot and meeting people where they already are is extremely valuable because you make mistakes, obviously, on a smaller scale before you make them all in the broad scale. But it's this ongoing openness that's going to help quell the concerns. And we all know what lots of those concerns are. First and foremost, am I going to lose my job? And the more people know, the less fear. And we all know that just in life in general, when there's a lack of information, people start making up their own stories and rumors get started. And then the next thing you know, a rumor is as good as fact. And everybody thinks they know what's going on with their AI strategy, but they probably don't because it wasn't managed through a clear, concise definition of the framework, explanation of the policies, communication of the overall strategy, and then the continuous transparency of like, this is what's going well, this is what's not going so well, and, keeping everybody involved in that conversation. Then what we all have to do as leaders, and of course, as HR leaders, you're driving this transformation within your organization. You've got to go from experimentation to true visible leadership. And we've talked about the pilots. and how important that is to meet people where they are, try things out on a small scale, learn and iterate, put that into your strategy, et cetera, et cetera. The next key piece of this is demonstrating value. Because there are a lot of things that we can do at our jobs all day long that, it's administrivia and it's like stuff that has to get done. But at the end of the day, we're all going to be recognized and celebrated for the value that we're delivering to the business, to the organizational leadership, and to the workforce overall, as HR leaders. And we had Ted Gorski, who many of you may know if you're longtime Rebels. He spoke on a Rebels call a couple of weeks ago about how the HR leaders that are, craving the seat at the executive table need to demonstrate business value. And this is an opportunity for an HR leader to take the initiative, own this workforce transformation of how people are going to adopt AI, how they're going to use AI, how those guardrails are going to keep them aligned with the strategy that is going to be continually communicated. And at the end of the day, what has that done for the business? Can you demonstrate how this has increased productivity in a team by 20%, which translates into this much revenue? Can you demonstrate how the new workforce organizational plan is going to reduce headcount in some areas, but that talent is going to be repurposed into other areas where both of those functions can use AI and be more highly productive? So there are a lot of ways for HR leaders to demonstrate their value, and taking the lead on an AI workforce transformation is certainly a powerful one. And then at the end of the day, it's about adoption. And when you start with a pilot, or you start with a small group, or you start with your leadership team, you need to generate adoption across the organization. And so there needs to be a plan from HR with all key leaders, every line of business manager, whether it's the marketing manager, the accounting manager, whoever it may be, as to, okay, now how is your team going to incorporate these policies and these processes into their daily workflows? Because it's when people feel like something is being disruptive that they are the least likely to adopt. Well, why should I start to do it differently if I've always done it this way and I'm really good at doing it this way and I really like doing it this way? Well, part of the strategy in the communication plan and the readiness assessment and all of these things is being able to clearly communicate to each individual person in the organization why this is good for them and good for the business. And that may be among our biggest challenges, but that's what's going to really demonstrate the value of leading a strategic workforce transformation like AI adoption and governance, and give the opportunity for the HR leaders to, really take that strategic seat. We've talked a lot about communication, I know. So the purpose of this slide, or this way in our 12 ways, isn't to, necessarily beat a dead horse, but it is to reiterate how important communication is, both frequency and, clarity. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. You've got multi-stakeholder engagement, right? There are people across the organization. There's your boss, who's, probably, hopefully the CEO, who's, standing next to you and saying, this is a really important strategic workforce initiative. I need you to gather the troops. I need you to get everybody on board. And that means getting all your peers and all of leadership to really align behind this strategy so that they can then help, work that down through their teams, which enhances the adoption that we just talked about previously. And, all these different areas where if you have a gap, people are going to come up with their own scenarios. And that's what you want to avoid. You want to address concerns proactively, right? We all know 2025 was a tough year. 2026 remains to be seen. Lots of headlines in the news about how, Jeff Bezos and the guy who runs Salesforce.com and these huge billion-dollar companies are, cutting hundreds and hundreds of heads and replacing them with AI. Well, that doesn't necessarily translate, in an organization of, say, 100 people, right? But they still hear the same message. People are getting fired and replaced by AI. And the more the HR leader is regularly and transparently communicating about what we're doing and why, it builds trust by addressing those concerns proactively, not having a layoff and then talking about the fact after, like, oh, well, we can use AI to replace these people. Because that just creates another, set of fear among the people who are left behind. Well, how am I going to do somebody else's job and learn how to do it in AI if I don't even know how to do either of those things? And it was interesting because Predictive Index did a study recently that showed that employees find their HR leader the most trustworthy person in the organization to talk to about the concerns of AI, adoption, use, displacement, and all of these things. So when in many cases people may feel comfortable talking to their manager, my gosh, I hope they do, right? They should feel comfortable talking to their line of business manager. But maybe when it's about their specific job and such a major workforce transformation that they don't even understand, HR is who they go to, to get that information and, hopefully find some compassion and empathy in the situation as well. And then last but not least, share the success stories. When you have a pilot and you run it within a team and they achieve their objective, they increase their productivity, they automated tasks that used to be manual, which now frees them up to do all these other things. Share those cross-functionally and celebrate them because that's where people will start to get on board if they're not already. But the people who are skeptics, they'll get on board and say, oh, I never thought that AI could help me do this in my job that'll make me more productive and free me up to do other more interesting work. Or maybe it'll help me be more productive so I can take that PTO I've been putting off. People are afraid that if they don't do their jobs to the absolute, peak capacity that's expected of them, that might put them at risk. If there are tools that can help them overcome that fear, I think that's a good thing. I see John has a comment in the chat. Michelle, could you read that?
Yes, it says recent studies of SMBs indicate current AI use within SMBs is more individual than a company's strategic business decision. It's a fragmented effort. I agree.
That doesn't surprise me at all, right?
Mhm.
Because there's nobody who's taken a leadership role yet to say, hey, we should be looking at this as a workforce. But everybody's got ChatGPT on their phone because they were trying to plan, their itinerary for their trip to a city that they've never been to before. Are we all doing that on chat? I know I am. So I think what we all need to remember, as HR leaders is that this is change management. And, just like the transition from, Outlook to Gmail, and I know that I've been through some really major transformations. Gosh, when Teams came out and everybody was moving on to the Teams platform, I mean, we had a cross-functional team that had a team leader, and all the key stakeholders were involved because that was a major workforce transformation. It wasn't just we're changing our email and our filing system. This is like 10x of that, right? And so that's where HR can provide such valuable leadership and understanding that, yes, John, change management as a business decision and how that's going to impact everyone organizationally, and that HR, really is the central functional leader for the entire organization. And that's why it makes sense for them to be leading this, for you to be leading this, I should say, to this group.
I think too, to John's point, the article that Rachel mentioned about adoption earlier, that same article mentioned that most of the adoption is within leadership. So the further you get to the top, the more they're using it, and the further away you get, the less they're using it. And it's because of some of this, because we're not telling people how to use it. What are the guardrails? Where's the fencing, right? What's the policy? But when you get closer to the top, you understand what are the common norms, the unspoken norms, right? What's acceptable. You don't necessarily need a policy, right? You kind of know what your boss is going to let you get away with and not get away with, or you might be the boss. And so you can kind of walk that line, where at the front lines, you're more worried about what those rules are, and you're not gonna step on that. And so it's very important that you're being very clear about it, and that you're communicating that, and that you're being transparent, and you're communicating regularly and often, because people have to hear it over and over again, and be rest assured that they know what's going on with it, especially as it's changing. Great points. Yes, and I agree. This is a change management initiative, and that's another reason why HR has to own this. We get asked a lot when we're talking to people, why isn't this something that risk management needs to own? Why isn't this something that IT needs to own in organizations, or IT should be owning this? And yes, I agree. IT should be part of this. Marketing should be part of this. Legal should be part of this. Maybe quality should be part of it. Finance should be part of it. But HR needs to own it, because it is a change management initiative, and it does require understanding the global perspective of the organization, and the policy management, and the reinforcement, and the communication, and the education, all of those pieces, and being able to partner and link arms with those different departments to then build the governance and the risk management. So you have to bring all of these people in. You have to absolutely bring in risk management, compliance, and legal, and IT for all of these different pieces. You have to build a governance committee. If you've been at one of my talks recently, we talk a lot about this, right? Building your governance committee is step one in our governance process, and that's step one in risk management. How are we going to use AI? What are the risks? What are the things we have to think about in our organization? And who needs to be part of that? Your IT, your compliance, your legal, your risk management team need to be part of that, need to be thinking about that. You also want to think about your vendor selection and your management. And so, to John's point, it's happening, right, in organizations, and people are using it. It's a little ad hoc, right? To Rachel's point, you have people using it on their phones. They might be using their own version of ChatGPT. They might be using their own version of Anthropic or Claude or other tools. And so it's a little bit of the wild, wild west. And so you want to be able to have some control over that, and have a vendor selection process, and a vendor management process. And that's part of your governance. And so as new vendors are coming in, how are you vetting those to ensure that they have the proper safety protocols, data privacy protocols? What happens if there's a data privacy breach? What happens if there's a deep fake breach? And you also have to think about not just the AI security within your organization, but the AI security outside your organization. What happens if there's an infiltration that impacts your organization outside your organization, right? And that needs to be part of that. And so you can't do this alone, right? And HR is best suited to link arms with other departments, because we do it in all other things: recruiting, policy management, change management, all of the other pieces of HR. We have those cross-functional partnerships. This is another piece of that. I was having a conversation with Vanessa Gutierrez at AI for HR. If you have not joined that community, I highly recommend it. It's a really great community. And we were talking about our roadmap product, and our roadmap product is only humans in the loop. So there's no AI in that piece. It moves over to the other product in our governance first platform. And she stopped me and she said, I love that you start with humans first. And she said that humans in the loop is imperative. And I wanted to start there on this slide, because I think that's something we have to make sure that we keep in the whole process. And we should start that at slide 1 when we talk about setting objectives. We talked about making sure it aligns with our culture, but we want to make sure that human judgment, responsible AI, we can talk about ethical considerations, but that goes into a whole nother area. But all of that guides every AI initiative. We want to make sure that we're preserving human judgment and oversight. You may build your organization of the future using both AI and human resources. What does that look like? You're going to probably have leaders that are leading AI agents in the future, right? You're going to have that human judgment and oversight. There are lawsuits right now, and courts are saying you are responsible for the bias of the AI systems that you're employing. And so you need to make sure that you have governance over these systems and that you have human judgment and oversight. So how are you doing that? Setting up your governance committees, setting up your governance, making sure that you have that human judgment and oversight, and making sure that you are keeping the human in the process, right? How does this impact the people we have in our organization? How are we communicating? Again, we're talking about communication a lot, but it's an important piece of change management. How are we communicating to the people in our organization? How are we upskilling and reskilling our people to get them ready for the future? How are we enhancing the employee experience using AI? AI is an enhancement to the jobs, not a replacement. So how are we enhancing their roles? And then empowering HR. This is, I believe, a great opportunity for human resources to take that strategic seat, to drive this initiative, to take the steering wheel and drive it all the way. And this is an opportunity for HR to be empowered and to drive a very thoughtful process for setting up AI in your organization so that it's no longer the wild, wild west, and your organization has a very thoughtful process on setting up AI and managing it going forward. And the future is going to change with AI. It's going to evolve. It's going to evolve quickly. The strategy you have in place today may evolve, but you have something in place that you can iterate and you can change over time. A couple of things in that study that Rachel referred to with predictive index that I wanted to point out. They quoted a survey from Gallup, and the survey said that a majority of the survey respondents, 70%, so 70%, 70, agreed that psychological safety was a key to successful rollouts at any business. In this sense, AI isn't much different from any other workplace innovation. People want to feel they can ask questions, air their concerns without fear or judgment or retribution. Giving employees a voice in the process is another way of gaining buy-in. So in order to gain adoption for your AI initiative, you need to make sure you're including employees. You need to make sure that you're having a human-centered AI experience in your process. And you can do that too through, if you're a small business, roundtable discussions. You can, if you're a larger business, employee surveys, getting out into the workforce and talking to them about it. Rachel mentioned a great example. Some of our beta clients are using the gap assessment and having multiple people take them and comparing results. You can do that. Having open office hours to answer questions. If you're remote, maybe just setting up remote office hours to talk to people and just giving people space to be heard and ask questions. And I know that's the hardest thing in HR, especially when you don't have the answers, but taking the time to hear them, write down the questions and say, I'll get back to you. I don't know the answer. I'll get back to you. We're working on that. Or pointing them to maybe a governance committee and saying, I don't have the answer to that, but we have a committee that's working on that. These are the people in the committee, and I'll bring your questions to them. And they meet every third Thursday of the month or whatever it is. And so I'll make sure to get back to you after that. And so at least they know they have an opportunity to be heard. Preparing for the future of work. We talked about continuous learning. So we have an opportunity where a lot of jobs are going to be disrupted because of AI. And disruption can mean a lot of different things. It can mean my job is going to change this much, or my job is going to change a lot more. And so looking at how, based upon our strategic plans, our use cases, how we're going to roll out AI in our organization over time, taking our best guess of what that looks like in the future, and then planning out what our workforce will look like, our organization will look like in the future. We can then start thinking about how that then impacts job roles and evaluations, and start to build out the future of work. Then you can start thinking about, how do I upskill and reskill people to get them ready for that? And I think that's one of the best answers you can give people, right? Your job is going to be impacted by AI, because this is our plan for AI. This is how we're going to roll it out, right? We are going to put chatbots in customer service, and that's going to decrease the need for customer service agents. We're not going to need as many, but we're going to need more people in sales. So we want to train you to be ready for sales. I'm making all this up as we go. So we've put together a training plan for you, and we're going to get you ready for that, right? The employees then put at ease. They know they have an opportunity there for the future. They know that you're going to invest in them, and they know where they're going in their career. HR leaders need to anticipate how these roles, responsibilities, and structures will evolve. And you can start by mapping out these competencies based upon what that strategy looks like. We talked a little bit about bias and responsible AI. We do know that AI systems are as good as the data that's in them. And so they do have biases, because humans have been putting data in them, and humans have biases. And so it requires human oversight. Responsible oversight ensures fairness and accuracy across all AI outputs. So we need to make sure that we are implementing regular audits, that we are watching for data quality, that we have processes in place to govern our AI, and to make sure that it's accountable and make sure that it's contained. I keep saying this over and over again, but this is a change management initiative. I'm just looking at the chat. Rachel, if there's anything in the chat I need to grab, just feel free to shout it out.
John just made a really good point about working with strategic partners, and it kind of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, there've been a lot of strategic rollouts, like, that people know how to do it. This is another example of that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go rogue,
Yep.
like John said, the lone wolf implementation is hard, and going rogue does not usually end up resulting in a successful rollout of anything.
Right, right. I agree. I also think, and if there are any HR departments of one out there, I think there's an unwritten expectation for the HR departments of one that you have to do it by yourself. And I've been an HR department of one, and I felt that expectation, even though nobody has said it, right? It's just kind of an unwritten expectation, like you have to do it all yourself. And you don't. And so I'm giving you permission to not do it by yourself. And so link arms with other departments, get them involved. People are excited about AI. And so bring them in. You don't have to do this all yourself. You don't have to carry the burden all by yourself. So bring them in, link arms with other departments, lean on their expertise. The IT person is not going to want to write and adhere to policies. They're not going to want to hold people accountable to the policy, but they're going to want to help with vendor selection. So bring them in and let them help do that piece. So lean on people for their strengths. On change management, culture, and adoption, none of these steps would succeed without strong cultural stewardship. So making sure, again, that everything is aligned with your culture. Your leadership has to model it. Employees need to be involved. And measuring adoption is really important. When you start to see adoption weaning, you need to figure out what's going on. Where is the break in it? You can do a lot of these things through workshops and starting to do it from day one. Like we said, involving that CEO right away. is key. Running workshops, doing brainstorming sessions, department level pilots, as Rachel mentioned, all increase ownership and reduce resistance. Measuring adoption continuously, asking what can we do better, doing retrospectives, what's going well, what's not going well, how do we improve, figuring out where the barriers are and why are there barriers. Sometimes people just don't like to do things because what they've done all along has always worked. I remember when I was at an organization, and this was pretty recent, they were doing everything, every HR thing by paper. They didn't have any electronic files. And I wanted to transition to electronic files. And the HR person almost crumbled right in front of me. She was fantastic. She was super organized. She was fantastic. And she was like, no, my system works. Why do we need to go electronic? And I said, well, then you can work from anywhere. It was pre-COVID. So it was at least 5 or 6 years ago. And so we finally did the transition and she was like, I feel so free. This is wonderful. But it took a while to get there because it was something she had her system down. And so, it takes sometimes for people to change and adopt, but understanding why and helping to get people there is important to transformation. We only have a few minutes left. I'm going to turn this over to Rachel to just close us out. And then this has been pre-certified by HRCI. And so Neha is going to share that in the chat so you can grab the code as well.
Yeah, so very quickly as we're heading to the top of the hour, and I appreciate people have places to go next, quick recap of the 12 ways that we can all lead with confidence in the new year with regard to AI, right? First and foremost, define a strategy. Second, prioritize. Don't try to do everything all at once. Don't try to boil the ocean, break it down into manageable chunks. Continuously educate and upskill. This is a constantly changing technology, everything about it. We're never going to get ahead of it. So you just want to try and keep up with it. Assessing your current state and your readiness across the organization in a lot of different ways. Then you want to develop and iterate and communicate your policies. If people don't know what they need to do, why they need to do it, and if the organization isn't willing to listen to meet people where they are, those policies are not going to be successful. So that's really important to continue to develop, iterate, and communicate. Moving from experimentation to leadership, being visible, being transparent about your successes and your failures so that people understand that this is part of the learning process. Partnering across the organization, we've talked a lot about that. Championing human-centered AI, as HR leaders, people and the workforce are first and foremost the most important thing, that we're focused on. And so this is just a new approach to leading human-centered organizations, with the complementary, with AI complementing that. Preparing for the future of work, the disruption that this is all going to cause, what a career path that may exist now may not exist in the future. How are we going to help people with that? Promoting ethical, responsible use of AI and bias mitigation. That's where the lawsuits are. That's where organizations need to be really careful about how they're training their AI and ensuring that they're inputting good information so that good information comes out of it and doesn't put organizations into any type of, risk legally, security-wise, whatever. And then at the end of the day, why this is so important to be an HR-led transformation is that it's about change management, culture, and adoption. And that's what strategic HR leaders do. And organizations that have really great, strong strategic HR leaders are going to benefit the most from the openness with regard to AI adoption and use across the organization. And one more thing that I wanted to mention on an earlier slide when I was talking about the fences at the daycare is that there is also a study done by McKinsey a couple of years ago that specifically said organizations that set up guardrails and structure with their AI usage demonstrated greater revenue production on the other side. So, they do a lot of data and a lot of research, which is really important. So I wanted to get that in there. And before any of the rest of you leave, we do have a special offer. Oh, actually, we have one more poll if we have time.
I think a lot of people have answered it already. So 86% so far said educate and upskill. 71% said they're going to create a strategy. 43, it's a tie for these two. 43, oh, it dropped. Okay. It says it's still a tie. Develop a policy and communicate plans and policies are tied for 33%. So create a strategy and educate and upskill are the kind of the top two.
Great. All right. And before the rest of you leave, it's great that no matter which one of these steps you follow first, you're all headed in the right direction, which is fabulous. We would like to share with you the white paper on the 12 ways HR can lead confidently with AI. Scan the QR code, give us your name and your email, and we will send that to you. And if you're interested in having a free strategic consultation, that is something that Michelle and I would love to have with each and every one of you. So let us know, sign up. You don't have to do the consultation if you only want the white paper. But we hope we'll get the opportunity to speak with all of you on how you're going to move forward with your strategy this year.
Great. We have a few minutes left. So questions, comments, thoughts, and real quickly, while we're going through that, the HRCI code for this course, you get an hour of general HRCI credits is 728354. So any questions? Let's see, there's some things in the chat here. We will send out the slides. That's been a question. So we will send out the slides in the recording in our newsletter, which goes out on Monday. So keep an eye out for that.
Can I just add one thing, Michelle? And that is that thank you very much for the presentation, both of you. It's been fantastic. A couple of things that occurred to me was that one of the things that we need to do, I think it's absolutely important that we do create a framework, safe framework, and provide people with avenues to use AI in the organizations that are approved and that it will be safe. And then after that, and you kind of touched on this, but after that, to make it safe for people to experiment within those boundaries. Because the best way of learning how to use AI is actually using it and thinking about it as, hey, what new can I do with this tool? And so I think allowing an environment where people can learn themselves and encouraging them to experiment is also a good way. It takes it from being AI is negative to, hey, we're giving you a space where AI is positive and we're going to drive towards the future.
Yep, I think that's a great point. Well, great. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope everybody has some good takeaways, and we will see you next week.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Bye.